Hi everyone. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today. This session will be recorded and is being recorded. We will be exploring Snyk and SentinelOne, the combined solution. We will start today with our panel discussion, followed by the demo, and then a closing session with a Q&A. I think, Paul, do you want to kick us off? So I think it'd be worth obviously discussing the individual platforms first. I think, Paul, do you maybe want to start off with that, and then John, you can follow up when he's finished.
Yes, absolutely. So Snyk is a cloud native application security platform. So it's in that kind of mix of application security. But what we try and do is rather than just enable the security teams, we enable the developers and the security teams. A few keywords around that are DevSecOps and shift left. So we concentrate on when the customer is building and creating their application, which they want to host, which is probably part of their revenue or maybe even the main part of their revenue. How can we help the developers make the right decisions, fix security vulnerabilities, and ensure that that resulting application is secure and robust when it's on the cloud? So in short, application security, DevSecOps, shift left. I think we'll leave it there for now, but we can dig in further later.
We definitely will. John?
Excellent. Thank you for that. So yes, SentinelOne was formed around about 10 years ago to really answer the question of being able to identify threats without any prior knowledge. So what we did is we built out some machine learning models and built those models to identify threats, both what they look like and also how they behave. Because if we think of how we identified threats previously, it was all about signatures, prior knowledge. You had to see the threat to be able to write the signature. What we did with these models is we were able to build models that were able to identify features and behaviors that look suspicious or malicious, and then have the agent or agents effectively kind of kill those bad behaviors and kind of that side. So where this kind of comes into what Paul was talking about. So Paul's on the build side, we're on the runtime. So we once the application is in production, that's where we start protecting the application at that runtime.
And then, John, we'll stick with you for a minute. Can you please speak into some of the value of what that brings from your platform?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I say, we built these machine learned models, and we layer on the top AI to understand, the behaviors. But what we actually do is we monitor every single process in real time at machine speed, and we build out what we call storylines. What that means is, rather than giving you if we see some suspicious behavior, rather than saying, oh, we've seen this suspicious behavior or this suspicious behavior, what we'll actually do is we'll build out this storyline. What that means from a customer's perspective is that they'll get a single alert, but they'll get a single alert that then contains all of the activity. So they'll be able to see exactly what's happened at the process level to understand exactly what's happened. So the main thing that we do by stitching this all together with the storyline is that we're actually reduce the number of alerts for the analyst to deal with in the console, but we can also automatically have the agent do the remediation piece. So the agent can autonomously take decisions based on AI confidence. So
Paul, same question to you. Value of Snyk's platform?
Yes, so the business value really differs dependent on which customer we're working with. We do see some themes, however, and that's things like their application being more secure, so lowering the mean time to resolution. That's things like being able to have developers who are more aware of security, the developer and the security teams working together better. So that then drives business outcomes like release dates being hit, mean time to resolution being lowered, and therefore really a more robust software solution that the customer's making. We work very hard when we're working with customers to understand what we want to drive and how we want to measure the success of the platform. But we do, as I say, have those common themes that we try and drive.
Yeah, so Paul, sticking with you, can you explain in a little more detail how the integration between SentinelOne and Snyk works to provide enhanced visibility?
Yes, I can. And I think John touched on this before, but I've got a bit of an analogy here. So hopefully it works. Okay, imagine you're designing a plane.
Hmm.
What Snyk does is make sure that the draftsmen, when they're writing the blueprints for that plane, are doing it in a secure way. So secure means something different for planes than it does for software. But essentially, what we're doing is when the developers are writing the software, we're making sure they do that in a secure way. But then obviously the plane gets built and it gets deployed to production or an airport. Then that plane flies in the air. That's when SentinelOne's making sure it's flying straight, it's flying true, the engines aren't overheating, things like that. Perhaps there's not been a bird strike, and they're looking after the plane as it flies. Now, what we can also do is we can feed back from that live plane back to the draftsman for future improvements to the plane as well, perhaps remedial action. So that runtime information is full of important, interesting stuff that we can feed back. Now, there's two actual stages, and we'll talk about the second one later. The first stage of the integration is Snyk pushing up data that the developers see into the SentinelOne platform. This means that when people are monitoring what's happening in the platform, they've got the runtime information from SentinelOne, but they've also got the developer or build time information from Snyk within there. It just gives everyone a bit more information. We call that dev aware security. And that's what we're trying to drive with that first integration.
Is there anything that you would add there, John, from the SentinelOne side?
Yeah, just a couple of things. I think Paul's probably covered the majority there, but really from a a security analyst perspective, it's all about getting that context, right? So when they see an alert, actually pulling the Snyk information in, the vulnerability, but also things like the project. Which project was this aligned to? So actually, because as we know in the cloud environment, you typically go and fix it in the pipeline. You don't go and kind of fix what's wrong in prod. So yeah, so it's that kind of feedback loop and getting the extra context in for the analyst.
So what specific kind of challenges or pain points would this kind of integration address for security teams and their developers?
So I'll go with that. So it's for the initially. So the main pain point is there's typically, this almost, dare I say, there's the kind of the DevOps team, and they kind of do all their great development work, and then you've got the security team, and often they don't often kind of come together. Well, what I think with this solution is that it actually brings those teams a lot closer together to understand potentially what we're seeing in runtime, because it might not be a vulnerability. It might be, say, effectively something around the business flow, the workflows within that particular application are what we're seeing in runtime, and what we're seeing the attackers actually have a go at. So it's that kind of bringing the teams closer together so that they can closely collaborate when there is an incident. It gets a much quicker kind of fix time.
Mhm. Is there anything that you would add there, Paul?
You're absolutely right, John. We're here creating technology, but this technology is used by people. If we can get those teams to have shared context, to work together better, then we're going to up our chances of being able to fix things, not go down dead ends, and actually really understand the application from build into runtime as a whole as well. So that's exactly the workflow or the way of working together that we're trying to drive with this.
Yeah, this is probably one more for you, John, obviously on the SentinelOne side, and some of the attendees might already know about Singularity Cloud. Some of them it might be the first time that they've ever heard it. So what does Singularity Cloud workload security bring in terms of detecting runtime threats?
So that's a really good question. So there are a couple of things. So the first thing that we'll do is what we call, we have a couple of different engines. So we have a static AI engine. So these are machine learned models. They're designed to identify threats that are effectively file based. So something where is, saved to a workload, might be a customer upload, the application might be a web application portal, something like that. when those files hit the file system, the static AI engine will put those through the static AI engine and will come up with a, do we think it's suspicious or malicious? So suspicious is a reasonable AI confidence, but malicious is a very high AI confidence. So that in that way, we identify what does something look like. But then what we have is we have our behavioral AI engine, which monitors every single process and the interactions between processes in real time at machine speed. So what we're able to do is we're able to identify threats. What do they look like? But then how do they behave? Right. So, and it's kind of bringing those two things together. And also with the behavioral engine, you can also detect things like, interactive threats. So, people using or misusing, as Paul was saying, they're misusing the system, then we can kind of identify that. So what we're about is identifying threats in real time at machine speed.
And then Paul, on your side, so that's obviously pushing back into Snyk's capabilities and in vulnerability scanning, isn't it?
Well, absolutely, because I mean, the Snyk side of thing is all about the devs. Let's build something as secure as we can before it even goes live. But obviously, if you put something live, then overnight new vulnerabilities get found, new 0 days, things like Log4j, which caused a lot of sleepless nights. So what the continuous monitoring by a live production system can look for those attacks. But then we want to zero in actually what caused that. Was it the container? Was it the open source? Was it the code that the developers write? And really having all that context together, it then means that your investigation team, your war room can really go and act on that individual threat. And as John said before, the fix is not to perhaps do something on the live cluster. Although a WAF with a rule can fix something temporarily, we want to go back into the build, use a more secure version of that software, and then push that through CI/CD back to live again.
Perfect. So I think we've probably touched on a few of them, but I just want to make sure that we're absolutely, 100%. Paul, I mean, you're on right now. What would be the key benefits for customers, do you think, or do you think that's been covered?
Yeah, we've pretty much covered it. But the thing is, this is the first iteration of the integration. Really, it's a partnership where we want to drive further and further integrations. So we look at it really as that dev team who are operationally and security aware, but also the security and operations team who are dev aware. And it's very much about that working relationship. So what can we do to drive context back to the developers? And what can we do to drive context up to that live security and operations team? And anything we can do in our platforms that drives that, that's what we're going to do. So I'd say those are the use cases. Closer working teams who have more context. That means they can prioritize operationally what they need to do going forward and ensure that we can actually react, first of all, to threats faster, but also prevent having to react to threats by doing things earlier as well.
Perfect. So when it comes to the implementation and adoption piece, I know that can be, quite a big thing for some pieces. Is configuring the integration between the two complex? I think I'll maybe shoot over to John. Oh, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's fine. I was gonna jump in first. So the way we've designed it is that at SentinelOne we have what we call a Singularity marketplace. So this is where we do vendor integrations with specific integration partners. The way we've designed it is you can go simply to the marketplace. On your Snyk platform, you would create a user, create some API keys. And then on our platform, you would just put in those API keys, and effectively it's an API integration. The big benefit for that is that when, so to answer the question simply, it's really straightforward, and the customer can get value pretty much immediately because it's all once the API keys and the trust is set up between our platform and Snyk, then it's all kind of API driven.
So sticking with you, John, I think it probably hits more with you, but feel free to jump in at the end, Paul. How would this solution affect a customer's existing security and development workflow?
So that's a really good question, and again, it's all about you know, as Paul said, you know, the developers create the application, they create it securely, they create it based on, you know, the vulnerabilities that are known today. But what we're able to do with the runtime protection is also identify 0 days, but also kind of different ways that people are using it. So for me, it's that kind of feedback loop is probably the key thing.
Perfect. Okay, so one of the pieces, is there any kind of best practices or recommendations that either of you would make during this kind of integration?
Well, as we say, it's a technology solution. We're pulling together these parts of information from runtime, from dev. Now, how does that work best in your business? Well, that's really something we're probably going to have to discover. Is it through another piece of software like Jira, how we actually control these war rooms and work together? Or is it just a case of, can we introduce any other processes and workflows that help these teams work together better? So really, I'd say rather than prescribing something at this high level, just know that the outcomes are being able to work together faster on the correct things, and then let us discover really the best way to actually do that within your business.
Perfect. Anything else there, John?
No, I was just going to really echo what Paul said there. Really, it's you know, understanding which teams, you know, how your teams currently work together. How can we then layer on some kind of you know, potential processes of that to kind of build that feedback loop in? So, you know, as I say, for me, this integration and the next, you know, phase 2 is all about that kind of feedback loop to kind of get us kind of get the two teams working much more closely together in collaboration.
Yeah, so Paul, you've talked a lot about, obviously this is the first part, and you know John's just touched there on phase 2. Can you give us an idea of what that kind of roadmap looks like?
Yeah, and obviously roadmaps change, but this next part is fixed in stone, and we know where we're going with this integration because it's I'm not sure it's almost built, but it's in the stages now. Essentially, Snyk has purchased a company recently called Helios, and they're kind of experts in open telemetry and extended Berkeley packet filters. What that means is now that we understand this application and where it goes live, we are working with our partners who are on that observability, security, threat detection side in order to tell us more about that application. So now that we can receive that telemetry information, we can know if something's loaded into the kernel as well. So when we add that into the dev's context, they can see, I've got a vulnerability. It's on this container. This container's on this live environment. And I can see from SentinelOne that it's been loaded into the kernel. And that means that they've got an extra layer of prioritization on what they should be attacking, what they should be working on first. And that's really what we're trying to drive. As I said before, it's that security and operations aware developer. Without having to go to these other platforms, they can further prioritize what they need to work on based on that runtime information.
Perfect, Paul. And can I ask for a cheeky demo?
Yes, I'll show you that just now. Right, I do have a couple of slides before I do this, so I hope you don't mind. Just to touch on some of those things that we did, that I talked about previously. So I mentioned Snyk is an application security platform, developer first. So that means within our one platform, we've got 4 main capabilities. So Snyk Code, which is static analysis or SAST. Snyk Open Source, which is SCA, looking at the open source in your applications, which today probably makes up about 80 or 90% of the lines of code in your application. Then got Snyk Container. We do a similar SAST analysis on them. What open source is on your containers and where is it vulnerable? And then Snyk Infrastructure as Code. A very common cause of cloud vulnerabilities is misconfiguration of infrastructure as code. And we look at things like Terraform, Helm charts, ARM templates, cloud formation scripts to ensure that the developer's doing that within a strict set of security guidelines. On top of all of this, and I touched on this before, we've got Snyk App Risk. So it's another one of those Gartner acronyms, ASPM, or Application Security Posture Management. And this is where Snyk's now not just showing vulnerabilities to our customers, but we're showing actual risk. And that's really the important part. The risk is more related to the business than the number of vulnerabilities. So if developers can understand that real risk to the business, they can prioritize their works better. And I'll show you a little bit about that today. Last slide. Snyk is not just a SaaS platform where you log into a user interface online. We are a set of tools that are deployed across the whole DevSecOps pipeline. So just very briefly, this you can imagine as a developer's workflow in creating and deploying work. They'll have some existing code in their SCM tool. That could be Bitbucket, GitLab, that could be GitHub. There we can scan for all 4 of those applications. As they check the work out into their IDE, Snyk has tools to integrate there as well. As they're pushing their work back in, it's called a pull request. Once they've done their own work on their own machine, they then push it back into the GitHubs, the GitLabs of the world. We can then check that to make sure it's not vulnerable before it goes in. Then an automated CI/CD kicks off, and again, Snyk can work there, even in the artifact registries. And then once it's deployed to the cloud, that's where we're getting that information from SentinelOne to help us prioritize back to the developers on what they should be doing next. How does that look in practice? Okay, if I can just switch to my dashboard. And I will try and be brief here, but obviously we can do a full demo going forward. But briefly, what does a developer see? They see a set of projects or a dashboard like this. Let's just dip into one project. That will give us the best context for a short demo. So in this project, once I've scanned it, I can see 4 scans around those 4 layers I talked about before. The code analysis, the open source, the Docker file or container, and the deployment.yaml. If I go into the code analysis, this is the typical way that Snyk shows vulnerabilities. And it's around those 3 things: prioritization, remediation, and then education. So here we can see a prioritized list of vulnerabilities according to this Snyk score over on the right-hand side. We can see it's a NoSQL injection problem. I can go into the full details and really investigate how that is in my actual code. And then I can go to the fix analysis to understand how other developers have fixed similar vulnerabilities as well. Once I know how to fix it, I would go and fix that in my code. But also Snyk then offers that education piece, which is a real example, or not just an example, but a real way of a developer doing a hands-on workshop about this type of vulnerability, learning how to hack it, underneath learning the mechanism, and then learning how to mitigate it going forward as well. That education piece is very important, and we can actually track which developers are taking and passing these actual courses as well. Now, it's going to be the same for the rest of the projects in here. We're going to look at the open source. We're going to find the priority, the vulnerability, the remediation, then the education piece. But I won't go into that for now, as we're quite short on time. The last thing I wanted to show you was that piece I mentioned before about actually showing risk rather than just vulnerabilities. And this is Snyk's new view on those vulnerabilities. And if I can just take you through a quick use case here. Imagine you're a customer. You, with previous Snyk, would see that you've got 145,000 open issues. At that point, it's analysis paralysis. You probably log off and go home. What Snyk's now saying is, of those 145,000 vulnerabilities, only 22,000 are actually on a container operating system. Further to that, only 3,291 of those are actually deployed as a container image on a live environment. Further to that, there are only 1,415 deployed on a public-facing pod, a Kubernetes pod that has open ingress into the internet. So now we're down to 1,415. And this is the next bit that we're adding here. Can you see this loaded package? It's quite small, but hopefully you can. Now, it's got 0 at the moment because we're not pulling the information. But what that's going to be doing is pulling information from SentinelOne to say we've detected that this is actually loaded as well. So you can see now the developer's got all this extra information to start working backwards from what's live, public facing and loaded into what's just live and public facing into deployed, and then they can reduce the vulnerabilities based off the actual risk. So that ASPM or app risk way of looking at vulnerabilities is what Snyk's now trying to drive, because that's how you relate it to actual business risk. And that is the conversation of the CISOs, the security and operations team, but we're making the developers aware of that. Right, I think that will do for an initial demo. I don't want to go to explaining too much, but obviously we can do a full demo at any time with anyone on the call.
Yeah, definitely. And then, John, do you want to give us a peek at SentinelOne?
Absolutely, no problem. So let me just, I didn't have a slide, but I'll put one up just in, just for the sake of completeness. So let me know if you see my screen.
Yeah,
brilliant.
See that.
Excellent. So what we do around kind of the cloud workload or runtime security kind of sits in, it's one of our kind of key pillars here that you can see at the top. So that kind of feeds into it's all part of our Singularity platform, which has multiple capabilities across kind of endpoints, identity, etc., which feeds into our security data lake. But what I want to really focus on is that integration piece, because we talked about it earlier, and I thought it's probably best to start there about how do you set this up? How do you get the thing going? So within the Singularity marketplace, you can see the Snyk application here. So when we go into that particular Snyk application, so if I go back one and then go into this particular one and then choose mine, within here, this is where you kind of put in your API keys. You can kind of put in, the organization IDs, and then it really is just a case of save changes. So once you've got that initial set of the user setup on the Snyk side and the API keys, you pop the API keys in here, and that's your integration setup. So it's really, really simple. In terms of kind of what does that bring, when I go into the Singularity Management Console, what you can see here is I'm looking at a particular threat here. So the threat is curl. So we caught this with our behavioral AI engine. So on execution, we caught this particular threat. Now, within the page here, we give you lots of information. We can give you the AI confidence level. So this is suspicious. So, somewhat confident, that it is actually suspicious. The next level up would be malicious, which is a very high AI confidence. And then you've got things like we provide you with the command line arguments that we use, the process user, and the originating process here at Apache D. We also pull in things like the Kubernetes information. So we'll tell you which namespace this relates to. We can tell you which pod. We can tell you which image this particular pod was created from. Then we also pull in the cloud information. So the cloud metadata, so the account, the region, etc. What that does is that enables us to then enables our customers to understand the blast radius. But the key thing here is we also pull in things like the instance ID. So when we've got the instance ID, if I go across to the right-hand side, we've got things like the threat indicators. So the behavioral engine will map behaviors to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So as we see certain processes interacting with other processes along that storyline, we'll pick up things like, hey, we've just seen a tactic of evasion and a technique of, say, obfuscated script execution. We also give you the MITRE TTP numbers, or tactics, techniques, and procedure numbers, where if I open this in a new tab, this goes off to MITRE. This will then give me any APT threat actors that are using this procedure, but also procedural kind of examples. Key thing here is that kind of storyline can be kind of visualized. So we've got the storyline here that I was talking about earlier. So if I go to explore, within here, we can see the Apache process is actually in blue. And the storyline itself actually became suspicious or malicious at this dash process. But you can expand this out. Now, this is a typical kind of day in the life of an analyst. They'll go to, say, this Python node here, and they'll say, oh, it looks like a base64 encoded script has been used. And so once they've done that kind of initial analysis, they can see, exactly kind of what's happened along that storyline. Now, if you remember the instance ID that I was talking about there, this is where we go over to the XDR tab, right? So this the Snyk integration is what we class as an XDR integration. So if I go to Snyk in here, we'll pull in the information. So this is via an API call. So when I went over and chose Snyk from that list, this then does that API call to Snyk, uses the instance ID, and then it'll pull in things like, for example, the number of issues on this particular ID, but also it'll pull in things like the project. And this is really crucial because this then enables you that link up between the DevOps team and the SecOps team. They now know which project we're talking about. They know the package is Apache. They know the package manager that was used. So you can kind of see all of this additional context that gives the security analyst the ability to go, oh, hang on a second, this is really kind of, this is that additional context. And in this kind of second phase, to kind of feed into what Paul was showing there about a risk matrix. So now when we feed this in the second phase, we're going to feed this information, we're going to feed our information, the incident information, back into Snyk. Suddenly you've got something that's actually, there's an incident on this particular, it's not only deployed, but actually there's a live incident on this particular workload, which means, again, that's, oh, we better get this fixed really quickly, or bring in some other mitigating controls like isolate it, push a new version, etc. So that was just a very brief insight into kind of what we're doing from the SentinelOne side.
Just while you've got that up, John, just showing that on the right-hand side there, that obviously leads to that conversation. So we know this threat's come from curl. We know which container that's loaded onto. That conversation is said, hey, developers, there's this container here, and it's got a vulnerable version of curl. So the developer then knows that we detected this live, and they can do one of three things. They can look for updating the container base image for a non-vulnerable version of curl. They can actually determine whether or not they even need curl on the container, because we do want to get rid of software that is causing vulnerabilities if we're not using it as well. So they can make that decision about whether to update or whether to remove based off this information that we've seen an actual threat here, an actual suspicious or malicious threat. I love that they rhyme.
Excellent. Thanks, Paul. I'll stop sharing now and I'll move over back to Kurt. I think.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we've got, and I think some of our attendees might be quite mixed. Some of them will have, maybe some of their customers already have SentinelOne, but they don't have Snyk, or vice versa. They've got Snyk, but they don't have SentinelOne. I think, John, I'll probably start with you. So how can I introduce SentinelOne to my Snyk customers?
That's a really good question. So I think the first thing is to find out kind of what they're doing around runtime protection in the cloud. What's their current solution, and then talk to them about what we bring, because I think you've heard, anybody who's heard me speak before about these kind of integrations will say, I always say, it's not 1 + 1 = 2. Actually, it's 1 + 1 = 3 or 4, because actually the combined benefit is greater than the two individual parts. So, but it's more about kind of, talk to your Snyk customers. What are they doing around that runtime protection? What are the benefits it's bringing, and what additional benefits the Snyk integration can bring?
I'm just going to add something to that. I think one of the reasons why this becomes a tricky question is, workloads in the cloud are seen as ephemeral workloads, where runtime sometimes can, it's tricky because these workloads can be up and down very quickly. Having something like SentinelOne, which is sort of architected for those workloads, makes a huge difference, because it injects itself in a way which is non-intrusive, and integrates with the technology. Now, every company would have some technology within the cloud for security. They might not always have runtime. So, just understanding if they have something, and if it's good enough, and if they don't have something, then it becomes an easy way for them to fix that problem.
Thanks, Bernesh. And then, Paul, from your side, how can I introduce Snyk to my SentinelOne customers?
I think the thing there really is, I always tell partners, don't expect to be an expert about this combined solution or doing the discovery sessions straight away. We're always here to help. So reach out to us. Let's design and work together on how to talk to particular customers. But generally, we see it's either greenfield, where they've got nothing yet, and then we can start being more consultative, and rather than placing a vendor, place a solution which includes two vendors, a solution to securing your applications in dev and live. It could be called a DevSecOps transformation project. If they have some other application security tools and SentinelOne, then actually it's not just to replace, it's an enhance. So we're replacing the actual AppSec side of things. But as John said before, 1 + 1 = 3 or 4. So we're actually giving you an extra combined set of capabilities. But I think the main thing really to think about is that consultative approach rather than vendor placement. Let's think about our customers and how could we kind of up our game in terms of how we provide our services to them. These kind of full DevSecOps lifecycle solutions to the problems that they may be having. Let's use discovery process to understand where we can help them. And I'm sure John will say the same. We're always here to help, define how to have them conversations and help you with them conversations, even from the very earliest idea of ones as well.
Yeah, perfect, thank you. How are Snyk and SentinelOne licensed? So, I mean, do you want to kick that off, Paul, and then you want to finish it off, John?
So we have a license around contributing developers in the main. I must add that proviso, which is around how many devs are actually contributing to the code that we're securing. So it's not about people that log into the platform or use it for reporting. It's about how many devs you have contributing. Then when we're kind of looking at other aspects of the platform, there are a few other things that creep in there, such as number of assets that we're scanning as well. But I didn't touch on those capabilities today. So let's just stick with that. Licensing is based off contributing developers.
And then on your side, John?
Excellent. Yeah. So ours is based on workloads, right? So, if it's a server workload, it's one license. So, server, the Windows, Linux server workload. Then we have a licensing for Kubernetes. So we don't care how many pods, we don't care how many containers. We work on the number of nodes in your cluster. And so that's a very kind of simple licensing model. So it's effectively per compute is probably the quickest way to say it.
Yeah, be a good one here. So, what is the reporting capabilities for these tools? When it comes to the reporting side, I don't think we really touched on that, John.
So we have kind of pre-canned reports built in, but the entire platform is built around APIs. So you can use something. We also have a Power BI template that you can use, and then effectively pull the data down from the platform and kind of build any kind of report that you particularly want. So yeah, but we've also got things like dashboards. So users can create dashboards, share dashboards amongst the rest of the team as well. So there's multiple different ways we can do reporting.
Okay.
On the Snyk side,
sorry.
sorry.
No, I was going to say go on, Paul.
Yeah. On the Snyk side, so we've got individual developer notifications. So what is contextual to that developer that they need to know on a daily basis? That's reports being delivered by email to those developers. Again, we've got a set of APIs which push out into reporting solutions on AWS and others as well. And inbuilt into the platforms, we've got advanced analytics and reports, which are all filterable. You can change the columns in the dashboards, they build diagrams. Most importantly, they're all shareable by URL. So everything that you can configure within the reports gets added to the URL. You can share it and you can export it as well. Happy to go through the full reporting capabilities separately on another call as well.
So to support our partners introducing this solution to their customers, we've worked with Snyk and SentinelOne to create a campaign in the box. So I've worked with both of them on both sides. It's going to cover email sequencing, call outreach. There's a newsletter and blog piece as well. So as much content as we can create on behalf of you guys to push out to your customers. So you can reach out to either a new aware or an exclusive representative to learn more about what's been discussed today. I will, of course, be following up with each and every one of you to make sure if you have any questions that might not have been answered during the session, or if there's any kind of burning questions that you might have, or even if you want any demos for your customers or anything like that, we can all arrange that. But yeah, I think it's going to be an amazing integration. I'm really, really, really happy to talk about this solution. I think it's going to be one of the best next things that we've got coming up, right?
Yep.
Right, Kurt, while you're looking at that, so there was another question within the Q&A that we probably didn't cover, which is, I think we might have touched upon it, which is, have we got any kind of examples of, code to prod security, that could help my team at kind of mitigating attacks? So absolutely. So I think Paul touched upon like log4j is kind of one example. But it's that whole, and I think during my demo piece, where because so for me that sort of, you've got a web application, potentially it might have a vulnerability, against kind of code injection or something like that, or somebody's misusing curl, the curl binaries within that container, for example. So that's probably a couple of examples about how that kind of closing that DevSecOps loop kind of helps. So I hope that answers the question, whoever asked it.
Yeah, there's another one that I've got here as well. I think this was the last one that we had as well. So should we look at code or runtime security first?
That's an interesting one. Now, what is giving your business more risk? Is it something that's live and currently on a server, or is it something that's being built? Now, I would say let's look at runtime first, or let's look at what's running first. But you can use runtime tools or development code time tools to inspect what's running. That's the real thing here. It might be running, but if we look at the Terraform on our machine or the container on our machine, we can identify it's vulnerable even from code time security. So the real thing is, how do we reduce risk? And that is either using tools that are inspecting the runtime or looking at its composition and pushing a new version live. So I'd say use whatever tool you can to reduce the risk on your live platform.
Yeah. And just to add to that, actually, in a lot of customers that kind of Banesh and I talk to will typically have, or they'll typically have something in one of those two camps. The bit that they don't often have are the two things that work together. So that's the other side.
That's it. Perfect.
But I think that takes us to a close. Is there anything that anybody else would like to add before we close this out?
I think we've covered everything on our side. Just looking forward to follow-ups. Obviously, Kurt, just let us know and let's speak to some of those partners. Fantastic.
Perfect. Anything from your side, John?
Exactly the same as Paul was saying. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it was informative. If you want to know more about the integration, go into a deeper dive demo. Absolutely happy to talk to you. If you've got specific customer use cases that you want to discuss with Banesh and I, always happy to jump on a call to kind of run through those. So yeah, but I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it informative.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you very much for all of the attendees for sticking to the end. Congratulations again. And we will be firing more out of these. If there's anything that you need, please do reach out to your to Exclusion Networks or to New Aware to find out more. Thank you very much, everybody.
Excellent.